So let's say you found a skeleton. How would you tell if it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey everybody, welcome to Dapper Reacts number 74. We're once again taking a look at Eric Hovind and Vocab Malone, which I still don't think is his real name. And they are going to be trying to defend slavery from the Bible by pretending that it's basically not slavery. I realize I did forget to put up the tracker for the funding, but that's okay. I'm not going to worry about it right now. Maybe I'll put it back after the break. So, I am joined here by Dr. Kip, who apparently is a Nobel Prize recipient for chemophilopathy, which sounds like a thing that is definitely real and not just made up. I'm also joined by Dr. Josh Bowen of Digital Hammurabi, and of course Vishanti. Everyone's channels are linked in the description, so if you want to go check out any of these people's work, I highly encourage it. Go click. But with that being said, Josh, why don't you say hi? It's been a little while since you've been on the channel, so reintroduce yourself. I'm sure most people know who you are, but still.
Sure. Yeah. So Joshua Bowen, PhD in Assyriology and minor in Hebrew Bible from Johns Hopkins. Was a lifetime fundamentalist evangelical Christian until I deconverted at Hopkins. And now I spend more time than I'd like to admit doing counter-apologetics, specifically about things like slavery and divine commands of violence and genocide in the Hebrew Bible. So,
while also releasing some dope rap tracks.
That is true. You know, I drop them like they're hot.
Yeah. And also,
or something.
Dr. Josh has bars.
Possibly the best Kent Hovind impression this side of the Prime Meridian.
Is it the only Kent Hovind impression?
No, it's far from the only.
No, all parts.
Many people have done Kent Hovind impressions over the years.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
I've done one. I did one while I was reading his dissertation, because we decided it would be more fun if we read through his dissertation, taking turns per paragraph, but we were all doing Kent Hovind impressions. And so, you know, I had to include a lot of coughs, because for some reason, Kent Hovind has never heard of cough medicine or cough drops or just drinking some water. Never heard of it. So, Kip, who are you?
The dime store, the dime store slavery guy.
Got it.
So I now that the OG is here,
right?
I'm feeling a little redundant, but I'm happy to be here.
And of course, Vishanti is here. Vishanti is here almost every week. If you don't know who Vishanti is by now, then you're just new here, and that's okay. But welcome. This is Vishanti. She is.
I don't really have any relevant credentials yet. I'm just here for comic relief, so
yeah,
happy to participate.
All right, so we are taking a look, like I said, at Eric Hovind. This was on his Creation Today YouTube channel. We only have access to the part that was put out for free, because I don't know if you know this, but his show has become, we put out a half an hour on YouTube, and then the rest goes behind the paywall. So that only the people who pay Eric can hear the full argument. But you know what? This is apparently, here's the thing though. What that says to me is that in this half hour, we're going to get what Eric thinks is the best parts. The parts he wants everyone to hear, not just the people who pay him. This is the part that's for everyone. Also, Savage... Oh, no, I gotta make sure I pull this up. Let's see, we got a couple super chats. Savage Pinnipedisaurus Cobra for $2 says, "Hey JV, get title." Yes. I'm sure everyone here recognizes that is one of the citations in Kent Hovind's dissertation, as he has in parentheses the phrase KJV, get book title, because he forgot to figure out where he got that verse from. And then he just left it there that way. Just didn't actually fill it in.
I mean, it's better than copying and pasting two endnotes, one after the other, and inserting them as a single quotation, leaving in the superscripted 24 and 25. Like, it's better than that.
My favorite is when someone
it's up there with the pasta mining.
Oh yeah. My favorite is when someone cites Ibid. And there's nothing above it.
According to Ibid.
It's just like, that Ibid dude, he writes on so much stuff. He must have been so smart.
Right up there with Jenna
Talk about pound math.
I also did love it. I once saw someone, it was Raw Matt. He was writing a paper that he submitted to an actual journal which was unsurprisingly was rejected. But in his work cited, one of the titles was a year, followed by the word Jeanson, followed by et al. And so I looked this up. I was like, what publications did Jeanson make, this Nathaniel Jeanson, with other people in that year? Literally the only thing he published that year was a book that he wrote by himself, meaning that Raw Matt just doesn't know what et al. Means. He just puts it on all of his citations. So, too young to feel this old for $10 says, Dapper, I hate to tell you, but someone put a tutu on your human suit, but the good news is that you make a very pretty ballerina. Why, thank you. And then Rosina Illegal Tax and Keller says, I'm new here, welcome Vishanti. You're not new. Alright, guys, so before we get into this, it is Tuesday, we do
Maybe
have
they just respawned, okay?
It's possible.
I'm not gonna judge.
So we do have the drinking rules. We're going to go through them pretty quickly. First of all, I want to say, hey, if you decide to play along and you want to play along with anything that's intoxicating, please know your limits. Be safe. Pace yourself. And if you decide to play along with something that is in fact intoxicating, be careful afterwards. Don't go out and drive or operate heavy machinery, fly an airplane, text your ex. Don't do any of those things. We here, both myself, the channel, and all of my guests, take neither liability nor responsibility for your poor decisions if you decide to play along.
Maybe don't format your dissertation.
Yeah,
afterwards as well.
Especially not by centered lining all of the text, which is what that Raw Matt guy did on his paper. Everything was centered.
I will say this, though, at least Uncooked Matthew did something that Terrence Howard, the guy who's going to overturn all of mathematics, did. He actually tried to submit to a peer-reviewed journal.
Hey, you know what? Good for him on the trying to actually do the thing that you're supposed to do if you're going to try to overturn all of math, which is submit it to the experts. Of course, it turns out that none of them took it seriously because it wasn't a serious thing, but, you know.
Well, the update is, according to the newest podcast that he was on, is that 1 × 1 = 2 was a metaphor, you guys.
Of course.
Yes, because math is definitely overturned with metaphors.
I listened to his Oxford Union talk, and that is not the impression I got from that, because he spent a lot of time trying to convince these Oxford students that 1 × 1 is 2, and that 1 pound times 1 pound, which doesn't make any sense, is 2 pounds, and not 1 square pound, which doesn't mean anything, but that is what the answer would be. Anyway.
Well, it's because Neil deGrasse Tyson...
Shanti, we gotta get through the drinking.
Responded to his letter.
How rich I would be if 1 × 1 = 2?
Yeah, we would all be fabulously rich. Which, actually, to be fair, is part of his point. Part of his point is like, oh, you're all just being tricked by the banks because they're doing the wrong math, and you really should be much, much richer. Like, that's a big part of his pitch. All right, we're gonna get through these drinking rules. So we are gonna take a drink whenever. Well, in this case, they're both creationists, but that's not what they're here to talk about. But whatever. Whenever the guys on stream, if they say something that's too stupid and we just have to drink, that's when we take a drink there. We'll take a drink if they actually get something factually correct, but they're not just reading it out directly. We'll also take a drink if any of them decide to mention that political party that was very popular in Germany in the 1930s into the 40s. We'll also be taking a drink if they cite a source, and then rather than the source just not supporting them, because their sources almost never support them, but if their source actually directly contradicts the point that they're trying to make, we call that a Trojan source, and we take a drink for that. Remember, it's not just fail to support. Like, if it's just irrelevant, then that's not a drink. But yeah, if I screw up the production of the show, we'll take a drink for Dapper as a professional. I would talk about the thing with ad hominid, but since we're not talking about human evolution or evolution at all, I don't think it's going to come up. So we're probably not going to drink for ad hominid, but that is a drink trigger that we usually have. We'll also take a drink if they tell a joke that doesn't land, or a story that almost certainly didn't happen. If it seems like it belongs in r/that happened, or if it ends with and then everybody clapped, yeah, that's probably something we're going to drink for. We'll also be taking a drink if any of us can successfully predict what the next point that the, in this case, I guess, apologist, I don't know, is going to say. In that case, we will take a drink if we can successfully predict it, unless it's blatantly obvious. But that's a judgment call, because these are all judgment calls, because this doesn't matter. It's just a game for fun. And remember, if you do not want to play with alcohol, please don't. You can play with juice, water, tea, coffee. You can smoke. I don't care. Do whatever you want, or just don't play along at all. That's fine, too. This is not obligatory. This is, by the way, a note that I got with a gift, so I'm going to be reading that in just a second. We will also be drinking, if any of you super chat or membership chat, anything to the effect that Answers in Genesis is a bag of dicks, because that's one of the things we do here. Basically, that stems from them trying to take down, not just mine, but like a whole bunch of people's very much fair use of their videos For months, they were trying to do that. Everyone. We will also take a drink if any of you super chat or milestone chat with any of the kaiju emojis that we have for members. And last but not least, if you gift memberships, we'll do that too. This is a card, which I got a tiki mug, and it says, "Enjoy your gift. You have to use this at least once in a live stream. For taking drinks, I will. I was not planning on making tiki drinks today, which is why I'm not using it today. Usually can't watch live due to time difference. Oh, and happy belated birthday from Shara. Thank you very much, Shara. It was a Star Trek The Original Series Klingon tiki mug to go with my Star Trek The Original Series Mugato tiki mug. So now I can have a Star Trek themed tiki party, which is not a phrase I ever thought I would say.
I don't know if you can see it.
Excellent.
There's this little red mug right here on my shelf. That's a Doctor Strange tiki mug.
Nice. All right, so
yep.
We have a few more things to read. Let's see. Noram puts for $2 says, Josh did Prophecy Debunking 2, tired of hearing. Savage Pinnipetasaurus Scoper for $2 says, did he publish a version in pre-Yiddish? Oh yeah, that same raw map guy. He's on record as saying that one of the languages the Old Testament is written in is pre-Yiddish, which I always thought was just Old High German, but I mean, what do I know, right? Roasting an illegal taxon color for $4.99 says, don't play drinking games with wasabi potato chips. The burps are nasty. All right, I'll keep that in mind. All right, but I think without further ado, now that we've been going for almost 15 minutes, it is time to put the video on. So Vocab Malone is going to go over why he thinks that Paul is using a theology of liberation and is therefore anti-slavery. So here we go.
And not just for the one
places,
guy.
That's all God's doing. That they should see God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Now you can go through and read that, but the point is that Paul takes the Genesis story, the Genesis narrative. He makes it part and parcel of the gospel proclamation to pagan philosophers there in Greece. That's important to understand. This should be part of our foundational message as well. And we have to understand this.
Oh, right. I'm sorry. So I forgot. Specifically, he's trying to argue that because Paul is using Genesis, that means he's trying to use the Imago Dei as a big part of his preaching.
Oh.
And then, sorry, for some reason, then following that with the Imago Dei is the reason that he doesn't like slavery, this Vocab Malone guy. And therefore, that means that Paul didn't like slavery. Which, if you can follow how all those dots connect in a way that actually makes sense, I mean, hats off to you. What, too young to feel this old?
I don't know about the rest of you guys,
so
but
I'll drink while Kip goes.
That's very clear to me reading Acts chapter 17.
Odd how it doesn't seem to have been clear to
I'm a biblical scholar.
Odd how it doesn't seem to have been clear to any Christians until, like, the 19th century.
Yeah, that's weird.
And apparently, I forgot to actually set up the drink counter the way it's supposed to be, so that's a Dapper's profession.
Uh-oh.
Terrio Carroll is referring to what Ramat said about pre-Yiddish and says he said pre-Yiddish, but he meant anti-Semitic.
Oh, with A-N-T-E?
Is it anti?
Yeah.
This is how we know the gospel is for all people. This is how we know the good news is for all people in the sense of Jew and Gentile alike, every color, every shade, every culture. It is for them to hear and by God's grace receive.
See, the thing is, he's right that Christianity from a very early time is making universalist statements, but that's just saying, hey, slaves can join too. That doesn't make them not actually slaves anymore. Slaves were never traditionally manumitted just when they became Christian until fairly late in Christian history, right? Like, eventually there's this understanding that, like, hey, we're not going to enslave Christians, but that's pretty late. And it also kind of went away when it became obvious that a lot of slaves were converting to Christianity and people just wanted to keep their slaves.
Also, wouldn't that be one of those pesky contradictions with slaves obey your masters?
Yeah, what is the point of having a command for slaves to obey your masters if you just don't want there to be slaves at all? I guess you could say, well, their masters aren't going to be Christians, so they're going to still keep slaves, I guess. Except we know historically that that's not how any of this happened. And the thing is, like, I said it before, like, if you want to use this as a reason that you personally don't like slavery, I'm not going to tell you that you can't, right? Because that's just your personal what I get out of the text when I read it devotionally. I can't tell you that you're wrong about that. I can tell you that maybe that doesn't align with like what the authors were saying, and it's not in line with what, say, historically those passages have been taken to mean. But like, if you then want to say that the Bible therefore doesn't endorse slavery, I mean, just does.
So you see Genesis showing up in Acts right when Paul is speaking to pagan philosophers. Because some people, Eric, are like, if they don't believe the Bible, don't use the Bible.
Right.
And Paul,
But
actually,
weren't these cultures ones that deified rulers?
Yeah, so that's one of the things is that speaking to a bunch of Greeks in an agora is not at all the same thing as like having a chat trying to witness to like the r/atheism crowd, right? Like those are not equivalent activities. For one thing, the Greeks in the agora, even the ones who didn't directly believe in like personal gods, which was a thing at the time, they were still very much open to things like philosophical supernaturalism and ideas about like, the divine logos, which might not have been a person, and the idea of like, a great chain of being and people being created by some kind of force. And also, I mean, Greeks weren't too exclusive in what types of god claims they were willing to entertain. I mean, one of the, like, there was also a big appreciation for things on the grounds that they were old, which, by all accounts, the Hebrew scriptures were. Like, there was no one who was going around like, oh yeah, that whole Torah thing, that just showed up last week. Like, no, everyone knew it was fairly old, even at the time. Although not as old as it purported to be.
Do you think that either one of these people knows about Greek and Hindu syncretism?
Oh, you mean like all those like weird like Hindu Hellenistic cities all across Central Asia? Yeah, no, I doubt it. I very much doubt it. Because that's the thing. That's something that the Greeks were very well known for, is they were just like, oh, hey, a cool new religious philosophy. Let's just take that in.
We'll take that.
Yeah. Al Trucker, who's been a member for 15 months, says, AIG, bulging conpiece, drips, eel flesh, gristle, heaving jelly, kippered, ling, mush, need of olfactory punt, quick rash, salt tap, under, very rye, xeno, yak, zippers. Those are words. I'm going to take a drink.
One for every letter of the alphabet.
Yeah. All right, here we go.
This is modern acrostic poetry, folks.
And I'm like, what's he talking about, first of all? He's not referring to... Yeah, he's referring to Genesis. He's not referring to one of their pagan stories. Not only that, but people also forget, just as a real quick aside, Eric, it says in the famous he was talking to them.
Anti-slavery text in Genesis.
Yeah, it's really weird to me the degree to which he's hanging his hat on the Imago Dei, right? Because, like we said last time, like the Imago Dei comes up like once or twice in the Old Testament, like at all. And then it's shortly followed, relatively speaking, in the ordering of the books, with regulations on how to keep slaves. If the Imago Dei was something that was going to stop you from having slaves, then why are there multiple laws about slavery following those few references to
Savage Cobra says, I had a guy say that it was so amazing that the ancient Jews knew about Asia.
You mean people who lived in Asia? Okay. Yeah. It's just like it's amazing when you find out that the ancient Carthaginians knew about Africa. And did you guys know that the ancient Greeks knew about Europe? And even more crazy, the ancient Aztec Empire, they knew about the New World. Wild, crazy ideas here. Donald Jaramillo for $2 says, Greece did with philosophy as the UK did with items.
Yep. Yoink.
Yeah, not entirely inaccurate.
About the resurrection in Jesus.
Yes.
Because people, they think Acts 17 starts there at the Areopagus, but he was already in the marketplace, and it says that he seemed to be a proclaimer of strange deities because he was talking about resurrection in Jesus. So it seems like the Greeks may have thought there was like two gods he was talking about, the resurrection in Jesus. But
look, when it says strange deities, it just means deities they weren't used to.
Polytheists?
Yeah. And the thing is, when it says strange deities, it just means like foreign or unusual deities. It doesn't mean
not familiar.
Yeah, because he's
not weird.
He's using older translations where the word strange used to just mean like foreign or heretofore unknown, things like that, right?
At least they understood he was talking about the resurrection of Jesus. So he started with the Bible, if you want to put it in that terms. He started with God's revelation. So I just want to draw that out. I imagine you probably heard those kinds of things, Eric.
Absolutely. Well, what's interesting to me is that science just keeps backing up Scripture.
Where the hell did that come from?
Oh, no, it does not.
Not only is that not true, but yeah, where did that come from? We go from like Paul in the Agora going up to, you know, a temple to an unnamed god and whatnot, and then to like, and then science confirms the Bible. What science?
That's just Eric confirming for everybody. I'm not actually listening to you, vocab.
I just have my script on. I turned on my creationism bot mode. That is such a weird thing to follow it up with.
So even if, like today, when I revert, like just like Paul talking about unknown gods and trying to relate to them that way, yes, he's already starting from Scripture. My starting point is Scripture. But
guys, again, those Greeks are starting with a point where they're already predisposed to listen to things that have a long history of like philosophy and spirituality behind it. Whereas if your argument is, I'm going up against like the materialist atheist crowd, which is what they were saying earlier. Sorry, Josh, I don't know if you caught that from last time, but yeah, they're not the same people. The modern like atheist crowd is not the kind of people who would identify with a bunch of Greeks hanging out at the Agora. Like that's just not what's happening here.
Yeah. Plus, it doesn't really do a lot of good to start from your scripture if people don't really care what your scripture says or don't think it's authoritative. So,
which isn't what would characterize those Greeks, right? Because while they might not have considered it authoritative in the same way that modern Christians do, they certainly would have been inclined to listen to it, basically just on the grounds that it's of significant antiquity and spiritual importance to some group of people they're familiar with. I mean, we know that there was a history of Greeks who were kind of into the whole Jewish religion thing, at least as sort of like a hobby. They were like, you know, sometimes I go and I listen to what they're saying and don't want to join necessarily, but I'm interested in hearing about it. That was a thing that happened. Let's see. My Unfinished Journey for $6.66 says, Hail Nero, Dapper and Hebrew experts. For a second, when VM said, what is he talking about? I thought they were talking about ALTs. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Al Trucker Super Chat. It was hard to parse. I was actually worried that I was just going to step over the words, and then I realized if I just don't try to parse it and just read it as a word list, then that problem is solved. I can just read all those individual words. Ad says, why am I seeing a primate where it says Dapper Dinosaur? I'm in my human suit. It's very itchy in here, and I hate it. And the minute that we go off air, I'm going to unzip it, and my whole dinosaur is going to pop right out. And yes, before you ask, I am using technology from Raxacoricophalopatorius to get myself inside the suit, and they have fixed the gas problem, mostly.
I don't mind going to science as well and going, hey, look, we trust science today. Here's what the science is saying.
He doesn't trust science.
Yeah, first, yeah, let's take a drink for how ridiculous it is to say that Eric Hovind trusts science.
Like, you just lying. Let's just lie.
But here's the other thing. Science doesn't have anything to tell us about whether or not slavery is wrong. Science isn't here to answer that question. Science can answer questions like, hey, what are the psychological effects of being enslaved? And what are the psychological effects of having that level of control over people, right? Science could answer those. But it takes a person to say, okay, well, I think those are bad. So we're not going to do that then, right? Science, if we want to say that like maybe economics counts as a science, which I think is a little iffy, but if we do, then we could say that science can tell you what kinds of economic outcomes you should expect from arranging the labor in your society that way, right? There are questions that science can answer. But generally speaking, the is it right or wrong isn't one of them. What science can tell you in moral philosophy is what the outcomes will be when you do a thing, which might be important depending on your moral philosophy, right? Like if I'm a consequentialist, I need to know what the consequences of my actions are going to be in order to decide whether they're right or wrong. And that's something science can help with. All right, we have a few things here. Joshua Yeast just gifted 5 memberships. And Roasting an Illegal Tax on Keller for $4.99 says AIG, including Little Hovind. Technically, Little Hovind is not part of AIG, but truly a sack of sulfating dicks. So we will take a drink. Actually, we'll take 6 drinks. Anyone else who wants to jump in about this whole science thing, feel free while I take 6. No one?
I was giving them a chance to talk.
You guys.
Sorry, I wasn't listening.
Oh, how dare you? He was
I
just
mean, I
bad.
was, but obviously I don't have anything to say about science, so, except that I'm sure that's dumb what he said. So.
Oh, it's always dumb. If you just assume that what Eric Hovind says is dumb, you're going to be right like 95% of the time. I can't say 100 because every once in a while he does say something that's true. Ben Dolly 1998 for $5 says a blank with blank on Friday and a Dapper reacts on Tuesday. You're totally throwing off my sense of days of the week here. Yeah, sorry. So for those of you who have sent well wishes and whatnot, Ben is in fact back home. He has taken the day off because it is his first day, fully back from the hospital. So I want to thank everyone who sent their well wishes. I've passed them on to Bent. He is certainly doing better than he was before he left. And so he and I are both expecting there to be a Kent with Bent next week. There you go.
All humans on Earth. Vocab and I look very different. Myself and somebody in Fiji who would look very different, or the Philippines, or Japan. We are all
Philippines mentioned.
99.9% the exact same based on our genetic makeup.
Oh, I see what crazy connection he's drawing. So he's trying to say that because of the Imago Dei and our common ancestry from Adam and Eve, that therefore races are fake. Now, he is right that races aren't a real, objectively existing thing in biology. They're a social construct. He's right about that. But he's then trying to say, so therefore slavery is wrong. But the problem is that if we're talking about Bible slavery, it doesn't matter if you think races are real or not, because it wasn't based on race. There were no racial categories as we now think of them that were operative, unless, I don't know, maybe Dr. Josh, maybe I'm wrong about that. You're the expert. Was slavery in the Bronze Age, or Iron Age, based on racial categories?
No, it wasn't a category that they had. Certainly it would have been influenced in certain regards by like ethnic categories, but
right.
If you were a foreigner or an Israelite, those were the big distinctions. So
yeah, because my understanding of
now,
sorry,
if you watch enough of these shows, as Josh has, and I've watched a few myself. If you watch enough of these sorts of shows, you quickly come to realize that these people seem to think that because slavery in the ancient world and as represented in the Bible is not based on the same types of racial categories, that makes it way, way, way better.
Which, no. The thing that's strange about that to me is, like, I have never considered the excuses that people give for their slavery as being very relevant at all to whether or not slavery is appropriate. Like, why would it matter if it's like, oh, well, we base this on like who lost in war? Like, okay, I don't like that very much. Or we that's okay. We don't base it on who lost in war. That's silly. That's barbaric and antiquated. We're going to base it on races. Like, what? That's not.
Yeah, it's like
there's no good basis for slavery.
Pick between might makes right and skin color.
Right.
Which one's better? How about neither?
Hey,
well, it seems like it's in the same category as look, the Israelites didn't kill everyone in the conquest. They drove a bunch of people out of their land.
yeah,
So it's fine.
Ethnic cleansing. Yeah, ethnic cleansing is
like,
great. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's such a weird mindset to
We
me.
didn't kill you. We just displaced you from your home. That's fine.
Roshina, illegal tax on Keller for $4.99 says, you just know /hope Eric Hovind has a good doppelganger out there. Yeah, it would be nice if there's like a good version of Eric Hovind running around like promoting like acceptance of science and why slavery is in fact bad, which again, I feel like I shouldn't have to say it. But, apparently when I'm talking to young earth creationists, or just generally, a lot of
The 21st century Dapper
apologists.
dinosaur.
Yeah, it's the 21st century where
The
slavery is
brave
bad.
new world
there's
out
a
there.
comment. There's a comment in the chat. Tesla Ranger is asking if the Hebrew Bible is Bronze Age. It is set in the late Bronze Age, but it was written in the Iron Age.
Yeah.
Some of the traditions probably go back to the Bronze Age, but we don't have any real things from that time period that are significant.
I tried to hit the play button on Dr. Josh's portrait. It didn't work.
So you would not be able to tell what we see on outward appearances. So I just go, man, science is just backing this up. It seems to me like we've got...
No one in the history of the world until like the 20th century thought that the Imago Dei meant that races weren't real. I want to remind everyone that for a very long time, the races were conceptualized according to which son of Noah they descended from. And here's the thing, that contradicts neither the Imago Dei, ancestry from Adam, nor does it contradict the idea that races are a biological reality. Those could all be true at the same time. It could have been the case that Noah was real, humans all descend from his sons, and that those sons form the basis for actual biological races that are distinct in terms of their biology. Like, that's a thing that could have been true. It's not logically contradictory in any way. Science in no way is supporting this. In fact, if you look at genetic studies of humans, it is flatly contradicting this. You cannot fit the Y chromosomes of humans in a time frame that allows for young Earth creationist ideas about Noah, because he would be Y chromosome Adam if he had existed. And you cannot recover that kind of tree. You can pretend to if you're Nathaniel Jeanson, but then you have to do things like pretend that humans aren't subject to miscarriages or natural selection of any kind, which I don't know if you guys know this, but both of those things are wrong.
Is
Plus,
Nathaniel Jeanson...
we know that Y chromosome Adam and a mitochondrial Eve were not contemporaneous with each other, so...
Well, we can't say that for certain, but they almost certainly weren't. They have an overlap within their estimated like age ranges of like 100 years in the course of like a several thousand year date range, so like they almost certainly weren't contemporaries.
Is Nathaniel Jeanson the Richard Carrier of young Earth creationism?
Yes. Yes, he is. Especially with the arrogance and the, well, you just didn't understand my work. That's always his go-to. It's like, well, did you read my book?
You didn't read my book.
I don't think you understood what I was trying to say.
You didn't read my book.
Yeah, and he will say that with a straight face to, like, PhD geneticists. I've seen him do it. Like, I don't think you read my book. It's like, dude, I read your book. It doesn't make sense. The almighty creature in the sky, who's been a member for 26 months, and is at the amulet level, says, the idea that each son of Noah gave rise to each race fully contradicts the genealogies given in Genesis. Funny. I mean, look, people are always looking for reasons to justify their horrible, horrible actions and beliefs. And they don't always care that much about internal consistency.
A sin problem, not a skin problem. That seems to be pretty
take a drink for that.
Wow. You're
and
so
even now,
clever,
Eric, you know more about this than I do, but within evolutionists, when people put forward evolution to a Christian as the kind of the given, they very rarely mention.
When people put forward the globe Earth to a Christian as a, the given, it's that's the same energy. And I can say it because
they very rarely encounter resistance.
Well, the thing is, almost all flat earthers are Christians, and they almost all say that the Bible is one of their reasons for being a flat earther. And I don't know, I have some experts with me. Is it fair to say that the cosmology presented in the Hebrew scriptures is that of a flat earth?
Yes.
Okay.
That was easy.
You agree? Okay. Yeah, this is why I brought Dr. Josh on to answer questions like, does the Bible assume a flat earth in the Hebrew scriptures?
Yeah, Josh is like, your next book is going to be like, is the earth flat?
Yep, they're giving me the easy ones.
Josh,
that's
take
why
it.
That's why they brought me here, for the easy ones.
Yeah. Well, okay, we'll throw it back to last time. I know that I said I wasn't going to ask, but now I will. Dr. Josh, could you tell us whether or not there are in fact grammatical rules about the relative ordering of agglutinative affixes in Sumerian verbal complexes?
Yes, there are.
Cool.
Hashtag not a linguist.
Not a linguist, everybody. You know how many linguistics courses I've taken? 0.
It's why it's so impressive, honestly.
Well, I read a lot, is what that is. A lot. If you look at my book collection, I have multiple linguistics textbooks, and as well as like this big tome that's just like a grammatical sketch of like 250 languages.
You're literally not beating the charges.
Mention or bring up, or a lot of times are aware of all the disagreements amongst evolutionists at very fundamental levels. For example, out of Africa or out of all over types of places.
No, it will be out of the Middle East, right? If we take the whole Tower of Babel story literally, you get an out of like roughly Iraq origin for humans, which doesn't work with the genetics that we have. Like it just. Doesn't.
Look, guys. I think we have to be honest here about our faults, right? I mean,
we brought you on, Josh.
Like archaeologists are all over the place about the origins of Proto-Israel in Iron One, right? Were they pastoral nomads that settled in the highlands, or were they pastoral nomads and people from the cities that had fallen apart, right? They're all over the place, right? And so I think what that means is that a conquest model is really the correct one.
Was the Pentateuch composed of the priestly source and 3 other sources, or by the priestly source and the non-priestly source?
Why are we
They're just all over the place?
All over the place.
Yeah.
Moses must have written it.
So, by the way,
crazy.
we do have someone who's asking what's wrong with Carrier. Look, Kip and I have a whole discussion that we had originally on his channel. It's mirrored on my channel. I don't want to super get into it, but I can sum it up, and anyone can disagree with me on the panel. I will sum it up this way. Richard Carrier knows virtually nothing about the languages involved. He is unable to find actual historical or linguistic evidence for his ideas about things like an expectation of a heavenly spiritual Messiah. Like, that's just not a thing that there's any evidence for. He's basically the same thing as Zechariah Sitchin, right? He says he's got this deep knowledge of all these topics, but no, he doesn't. And the way you can tell is because everyone who actually does spend their entire life doing things like studying the archaeology and the languages and the literature and the history, none of those people think he has any standing. Now, that's not to say that there was necessarily a historical Jesus, as I have been accused of saying that I've proved. People have said, oh, Dapper says he proved that there's a historical... No, I didn't. But I am saying that I can say with extremely high confidence that whether or not a historical Jesus existed, virtually everything that Richard Carrier says that is distinctive to him about first century Judaism is just flat wrong. It's just not true. So if you find Richard Carrier persuasive, I would suggest to you that that is because you have not surveyed the field widely, which is okay. I mean, it's not your field, presumably. But yeah, you might want to check with other sources.
I don't have anything to say about his opinions on whether Jesus existed historically or not. I don't really care, but he does not know anything about the Talmud or the way that works. Like, he was out there saying that Hillel won every ruling in favor of his camp, and I'm like, bro, the Talmud says that Shammai actually has rulings in his favor. At minimum, there's 18 cases. Can you name one? And he's just like, well, okay, so it was most of the time, and he doesn't know Hebrew. He just knows that other people he read knows Hebrew, which means that he doesn't know Hebrew. If you're reading people that understand a language, but you don't internalize anything that they're saying, you don't understand it. So
Roshina, out of all over, Keller, for $4.99 says, Carrier also writes super creepy notes to his female students. Yes, that is not directly tied to whether or not he is right, but yes, he does. He is, kind of a creep.
He has a boundaries problem.
Yeah, he really does. Yeah.
So,
and the idea of, just a two couple producing everybody was laughable for a long time, but now they've sort of...
And it still is.
Yeah, let's just take a drink for...
Still is, no?
Still is.
I don't know anything about this stuff, but...
Oh, I do, don't worry.
Pretty sure that's still silly, right?
Yeah, it's extremely silly.
Mm-hmm.
If he gets more into it, we'll get more into it.
Seated in a manner of speaking with, well, there was a population bottleneck, and so there's sort of a genetic Eve kind.
Okay, so those are separate concepts, right? All right, so here's the thing. For any given part of your genome, there is a time at which every single person on Earth shares a common ancestor for that part of their genome, right? It doesn't matter which part it is. You'd pick any single gene, any part, right? You can go back in time and find how long ago until that was one single genome everyone else has inherited that part of their genome from. It just happens that because the Y chromosome and mitochondria don't cross over, that it's easier to isolate those and do the math on those because it's less complicated. And so at some point, if you go back in time, you can find the one person whose mitochondrial genome has been inherited by everyone else since then. But that person is not the only person who's passing down mitochondria at the time. She wouldn't have ended up being mitochondrial Eve for probably tens of thousands of years after she died. There would have been other mitochondrial lineages going on. And all that you have to do to know this is it's just statistics, right? Over time, one lineage is going to come to dominate over the other ones and be the only surviving one if you give it long enough. And it turns out, yeah, we've been around long enough. And the same thing is true for the Y chromosome. The evidence of a bottleneck is not the same thing, because any population with a bottleneck or no, just as a result of how statistics works, will have a mitochondrial Eve and a Y chromosome atom. The reason humans are thought to have had a bottleneck is because human genetics, even from pretty far in the past, starts out with a really weirdly low amount of diversity. There's more diversity within one troop of chimpanzees, genetically speaking, than there are in most human countries. Humans are weirdly homogenous when it comes down to DNA, which is one of the reasons why we know that human races aren't a real biological thing, because everyone's already extremely homogenous. So, yeah, those are not the same idea. They're not even connected. It's just that neither Vocab nor Eric know enough about population genetics to know the difference between a most recent common ancestor and evidence for a bottleneck. And again, it has nothing at all to do with what's on their screen. Is biblical slavery justified? Because I want to point out that we're talking about genetic bottlenecks and Y chromosome atom in the discussion of is biblical slavery justified. And I just want to ask the panel, can you imagine an answer to the question of how long ago mitochondrial Eve or Y chromosome Adam lived, and whether or not there was a human bottleneck that could possibly change the question, the answer to the question, is biblical slavery justified? Could you think of any scenario where it would change that answer? Because I can't.
Negative.
Yeah, no.
No, but not really Eve. We just call her that because she kind of functions that way. But it was
No, she doesn't function that way. Eve is supposed to have been the first human woman who ever existed.
Ever.
And the common ancestor, the first female common ancestor of all humans. Mitochondrial Eve is neither of those things. You have female ancestors who were contemporaneous to mitochondrial Eve. You just didn't get that ancestry through an all-female line from mother to mother to mother to mother to mother. There was a father somewhere in there, which broke the line of mitochondrial descent. But you are still descended from the female contemporaries of mitochondrial Eve. She is not the first woman. She is not the first and only ancestor in that generation of all humans. Right? Because think about your maternal grandmother. Sorry, your paternal grandmother. You don't have her mitochondria. Her mitochondria have no part in your genetics at all. Because your mitochondria only come from your mother's and her mother and her mother and her mother and her mother, all the way back in the exclusively female line. The minute a single male gets into that line in your ancestry, the single time it's a male ancestor, that mitochondrial line ends there for you. You don't get those mitochondria. So you have other contemporaries of mitochondrial Eve in your ancestry who are females. It's just that in all of those cases, somewhere there was a dude. Sorry, mitochondria.
a small population. Now they're like, well, the Bible story, it's wrong, but we're going to use mitochondrial Eve and don't get it twisted.
Hey guys, did you know that people name planets after Roman gods, and that is not good reason for Eric to think that the Roman gods are real? I'm just going to take a drink because, the whole, well, they called her mitochondrial Eve, the Bible must be true. It's just such a wild take. Vantalia, 1990.
It's just so hard
Saturn
for these.
confirmed.
Yeah, Saturn is real.
Jupiter as a real entity confirmed.
Mars, Venus, all of them.
So hard for these
even
people
close-
to imagine that scientists can, be clever and
clever,
creative,
even whimsical
and,
sometimes. Nerdy.
well read, and
I read a paper about Oumuamua, the rock from outer space that was from outside the solar system that tried to name that class of objects in Klingon. They translated it wrong and it didn't stick, but they tried, gosh darn it. Sorry, Josh, I think you were going to say something too. I want to make sure you get that in there.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, closer to home for these guys. I mean, like, we don't think Matthew wrote Matthew, right?
They do.
But when we talk about it, we say
They
Matthew
do.
19, right? That, like, not evidence.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
If I stub my toe and I say, "Oh my God," like that's not evidence that it is.
I mean, I have heard people say, "Oh, you say you're an atheist," but you say
Well-
things like "I'm going to pray" or "Oh my God." It's like, yes, thank you. I am
Clearly,
in fact an English speaker.
You've never met my mother, Josh.
Oh.
Sorry.
Oh,
Okay, so let's see. I want to make sure I didn't miss any. Vandali 1998 for $5 says true mitochondrial E lived about 2.5 to 3 billion years ago. I think you mean no, that's not right. And was the first cell to
That seems
merge
a
with
little long.
bacteria that would become an organelle. Oh, sorry, the true mitochondria. So, like, for all living
the
eukaryotes.
true. Okay.
Actually, that is still
Yeah.
probably not even true. If you want to find like the common ancestor of all mitochondria and all of extant eukarya, it's still probably not the original the original archaean that was subsumed into a larger cell. It was probably something after that, because those first few lines probably all went extinct except for that one. Roshina, out of all over Keller for $4.99 says, I think they're saying slavery is justified if you don't know the people. I mean, I hope that's not what they're saying, because I feel like that doesn't work. Goop 23 et al. Yes, for $5 says, scientists don't know about appreciating culture. All they know is eat hot chip and lie. Eric Hovind.
Yes. Yes.
Oh.
All they know is eat hot chip and lie.
Yes, but also
So
check
good.
their phone.
And
Christian
check they
Christians,
phone.
we're not
True.
saying it's right, but it's like they're closer now to like, well, it was a bottleneck. There was a bottleneck.
So close.
It's like, yeah, it was a bottleneck.
I mean, this is
Man,
not. Sorry,
okay.
this is
You know
not sorry, go ahead, Vishanti.
No. Go ahead. It's petty. Go ahead.
Like, this is not a path he wants to go down.
No.
Right? Like, don't even begin to get me started on the way that fundamentalist evangelicalism has moved toward what we might call like the center, based on archaeological data or ancient Near Eastern comparative data. Like, don't even begin to get me started on that. Like, this is not a flex that he wants to try to utilize.
I mean,
because we have this all the time, right? Like, looking at things like the combat myth, right? Or, text from Ugarit. Like, you're just going to see people moving away from this very fundamentalist reading of the text to, well, okay, so yeah, maybe there's more here in the primeval history than just like straight history, right? Maybe there is something more to this flood story. Maybe it is polemical, and or maybe we do have to rethink the word Eleph in Hebrew, and maybe it doesn't mean 1,000, because we know that there can't be like 3 million people leaving New Kingdom Egypt, because there's only 3 million people in New Kingdom Egypt. So, like, I don't know. Like, and sorry, last thing I'll say, like this whole movement of people misusing the characterization of ancient Near Eastern law collections and law collections in the Hebrew Bible, because they're not normative legislation, dipping their toe into a historical critical approach and then backing back out into their fundamentalism and saying, so Yahweh gave it, but it wasn't like rules or something, right? Like, but this is a direct result of them having to engage with in a way that they can't dodge the ancient Near Eastern material. Like, so not a path he wants to go down.
Now, Josh, if there were a book that people could buy about the topic of like comparing, say, biblical rules about slavery to other ancient Near East rules about slavery, and like prestige law codes and comparatives and such like that, like what book could they go buy? Maybe that's on Amazon now or something.
I guess I could get mine.
What would
the
it
Old
be
Testament
called?
or slavery.
Okay.
I also think Samuel Gringus's book would be good. But yes, I think that's probably where you're going.
Just buy Dr. Josh's book.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Also, some of those notes
Let's do
Vishanti
it.
sent you also came from me. So, because someone was like, Dapper, we got to go over this book. And I'm like, what book are we doing? And suddenly there's a manuscript version of Dr. Josh's next book. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So we're just sitting here on Discord going through the manuscript. It was very good. I highly encourage people to go buy Dr. Josh's book about slavery in the Hebrew Bible.
I mean, it's not the whole thing about it being like 700 pages. It's because the whole like last half of the book is all of the contemporaneous slave laws from the ancient Near East.
Yeah, just compiled in one place.
It himself. So it's not like you have to go outside to go find other examples to do comparative, analysis. You just flip to the back.
It's also a formatting issue. Sorry, did I say that out loud? Sorry.
All right,
sorry.
Go ahead and critique, but I think it was a good move that Megan
I
made.
appreciated it.
I liked it.
People and then 8 people. There's your bottleneck.
Exactly. The science matches. It's so frustrating for me.
It doesn't. The bottleneck is estimated to have reduced the human population to an effective, not census, effective population size of tens of thousands, which could mean several, like an order of magnitude more actual individuals. It probably doesn't, but it could mean that. It could actually even mean fewer, but...
Screenshot this because he wants to talk to you about your car's extended warranty.
Yes.
But I'm going to take a drink for it just lines up with the biblical bottleneck no, it doesn't.
When you look at science doesn't say anything. You got to interpret it. So scientists say things. But when you look at the data,
Same with the Bible.
Wow, it seems like that's what God told us a few thousand years ago.
Same with the Bible.
Made it from 2 people. We've discovered Y chromosome Adam and mitochondrial Eve. We all came from
That gives you a really good insight into their mindset. He just acknowledged that the text of the Bible doesn't just say stuff on its own. It needs to be interpreted. And he's saying that applies to science, which is funny because you can repeat scientific experiments. That's why they're scientific. And you can't do that with the biblical text, which makes it funny that he just made that comparison because I think he just kind of kneecapped his own argument. My guy.
A little bit, yeah. But also I want to point out that, remember I said that you can actually find the most recent common ancestor for any part of the genome? And we just tend to talk about the mitochondria and the Y chromosome because they're the easiest parts to do the math for. But that doesn't mean we haven't done the math for other parts of the genome. And in every case, it's usually 1 to 2 orders of magnitude older than Y chromosome Adam and mitochondrial Eve. Which means that none of this actually works. Because if you identify, even if you could pretend that you could shrink down the timeline of, say, Y chromosome Adam to get you to Noah, that still means that the rest of the genome has to be much, much, much older than that. Which, since Noah is on the, somewhere around 4,400 years, and it's 1 to 2 orders of magnitude more for most other parts of the genome, that means you're having to look at Adam some 40,000 years ago. That's way too long for young Earth timelines. Sorry, guys. It's not going to work no matter what you do. And also, I have to point out that just getting this Y chromosome back to Noah, as Nathaniel Jensen did, he had to throw out all of the Neanderthal Y chromosome data. Just toss it. Because if you include that, you've got a much bigger problem, because even with his crazy assumptions that don't work, you're going way farther back than 4,000 years. So, yeah. Sorry, Josh, I did not know that this was going to be so much like just them saying nonsense about evolution. I thought this was going to be more about actual slavery. So,
The men came from 1 man. All the women came from one woman. And there's a bottleneck somewhere along the way where we split up into 3.
No.
Hold up.
No, there's not.
Adam gave rise to just men.
Yeah.
And all the women came from Eve. So what did he just do? Can you please rewind that? I need to hear him say that again. It's dumb. All the women go back to one man. To Eve.
All the women came from one woman.
Does he know how kids are made?
I mean, he has kids.
I'm sure he does. He has some.
Yeah, he has some.
He has some, I think, right?
Maybe he and his wife are just super into artificial insemination, and he doesn't really get the details on how all of that works. He just gives a sample to a doctor, and then later on his wife is pregnant, and he has no idea what happens in the intervening time. Maybe
somehow, human beings figured out how to reproduce asexually, I guess.
Yeah, and the Bible times.
All men didn't come from Adam. To be fair, the Bible doesn't say that Adam didn't become pregnant.
It doesn't say he explicitly.
I mean,
did
I'm thinking
not
about the
become pregnant.
Hebrew. It doesn't mention the women. It just says Adam begot so and so. Maybe you can make a case for it.
I think we new theology, parthenogenic male humans.
New theology just dropped.
It does actually say that Eve became pregnant,
but it doesn't say that Adam didn't.
Yeah, for Seth.
True, right?
See, that's the thing. So Eve gave birth to some of Adam's kids, but Adam gave birth to other of his kids. Yeah. That's the new theology we're going with.
That's how they populated the whole earth, because it's like if you have both of them making kids, like you could just double the work.
Exactly. Have 2 babies every 9 months.
1 times 1 equals 2.
Thanks, Terrence.
1 woman. And there's a bottleneck somewhere along the way where we split up into 3. There's
okay, so that's also a misinterpretation. I'm not going to say Eric is lying because I don't think he knows enough. This is a reference to a unrooted tree of Y chromosome haplogroups in humans. And if you don't root the tree, then you do see what looks like a 3-pointed starburst. But the problem is that when you actually root the tree, you realize that 2 of those bursts of the star are actually one subgroup, and then the other group that includes the longest branches is actually the outgroup to those other 2, which means that there is no polytomy, which is what you would expect if this story were true. Sorry, I just bumped my mic. You would expect a polytomy, which is basically a place where the phylogeny doesn't split directly into 3 or more branches come out from a single point. Those are usually assumed to just be unresolvable because it's usually assumed that there is actually an underlying history of splitting by 2, but it doesn't have to be the case. If the Noah story were true, it wouldn't be the case. There would be an unresolvable polytomy there, but there isn't. Everyone who roots this tree using actual mathematics and statistics gets the same root, and it is not a 3-point polytomy when you root the tree. The only way to convince people of this is to basically lie to them about what that starburst figure means. That's it. So, and now I don't think Eric is doing the lying because I don't think he knows enough about this. Let's see. Savage Pinnipedisaurus Cobra for $5 says, "Thank you for giving me the mental image of Eric Hovind with a turkey baster." No. It's Mrs. Eric Hovind with a turkey baster. He's just got a cup.
Why would you
come
do
from
that?
3 different men. That's Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So yeah, I think the science supports that incredibly well. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, I guess the evolutionists watching this will be like, well, these guys clearly don't understand what we mean when we talk about the power.
Hey, he's right! Congrats!
He's right! Excellent. Well done.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to pour another beer into this cup, and then we're going to take a break pretty soon. We're going to get a little bit more in, though.
Population bottleneck. All we're saying is you're closer to us now than you were before, guys. And
yes.
It's nice to have you a little closer what you were. So as we continue on now, let's look at some biblical...
So I want to point out that nothing has changed. It has always been known that as a mathematical certainty, there was a most recent Y chromosome ancestor and a most recent mitochondrial ancestor. That has never, ever been a non-option, right? It is a mathematical certainty that such people existed in the past. The fact that we have come up with time estimates for them is not anyone moving closer to young Earth creationism. That is just you not understanding how population genetics works at a very basic level, which is fair, since most people don't. But the difference is, most people who don't understand population genetics don't go around calling population geneticists idiots. Which is why I criticized you for it, right? And I mean, it's the same thing with everything, right? Like, I'm sure that Kip and Josh don't go around calling everyone who doesn't understand the intricacies of Hebrew grammar an idiot. Because they probably, like, most people don't. I certainly don't. But on the other hand, if you started going around with obviously no knowledge of it and calling Josh and Kip idiots, well, now they might have something to talk about there. A little bit more.
I might have done that.
Biblical ethics. So I looked at Acts, but now let's look at some things in the Old and New Testament briefly that show the overall arching ethic here. Because understand, when I mention Genesis 1 and when I mention the rest of the Old Testament, we're talking pre-fall and post-fall. And in the Christian understanding of history, which I believe is the true understanding of the world's history, because God was there and he told us what happened. It's actually...
the Bible is an eyewitness account. Just drink. Okay, here's what we're going to do, guys. We're going to take a quick break. We will put on the intermission video. This is a great time for anyone who needs it to get a fresh drink, use the bathroom real quick, and we will be back in just a few minutes. I will give my quick after the break talk, and then we will dive right back into this guy's examples of the biblical ethic, which apparently is going to be anti-slavery, which is weird because, again, no Christian until like the 19th century ever noticed that it was anti-slavery. And when I say no, I'm sure there was the occasional abolitionist somewhere deep in the history there. You know what I mean. It was not a widely held interpretation. Don't come at me with the, well, you know, Saint blah blah of Slarta Blartfast said that slavery was bad. Okay, great, you found one. I don't care. All right. We're going to go on a quick intermission. We'll be right back, everybody. Okay, we are back. Unfortunately, Dr. Josh had to leave us. I should have remembered this, and I should have stayed on and only had the break after he left. That is my fault. I will take a Dapper as a professional drink for that one. Because, yeah, that's my bad on that. But also, Savage, Peanut Petasaurus Cobra gave 5 gifted memberships, and also did Fits of Blah Blah Rage. Oh, sorry, Saint Blah Blah Rage.
Blah blah.
Yes. And Gandry, the Parthenogenic Golem, $1.99. Says, but were you there? Says BOD. Yeah, no, I wasn't there. Oh, also that was their 5th super chat. So thank you very much. All right, guys, I'm gonna take some drinks while I give the spiel because I got 6 to go here. So here's one. This channel is almost entirely supported by my viewers, you guys out there. Without you, I would not be able to keep this channel going, at least not in the way that it is here. If you want to help out with that, there's a number of ways to do it. Here's 2. One of the best ways is the Patreon. It's where I get to keep the most. If you go there, it starts at $1 a month. You can go annual for a 15% discount. You can go all the way up to $100 a month if you want to. Get access to a super secret Discord server, early access to videos, and higher perks at higher tiers. Here's 3. There's also channel memberships. It's basically the same thing, except it starts at $1.99, goes all the way up to $20. It's only monthly, but you also get the cool green name, the cool symbol after your name, access to channel emojis, and stuff like that. So here's 4. If a monthly or an annual thing isn't your thing, then there's also an Amazon gift list, or wish list, linked in the description. There's also a merch store underneath this video. There's a whole bunch of merch panels. If you don't like any of that stuff, just click through. There's other stuff. There's 5. Now, if financial support is just not your thing, or you just can't afford it, which is perfectly fine, please don't give me money that you can't afford to give me. Make sure that you hit like, share my videos. All of that stuff really is a big help. And I am seeing that we don't need to Bilbo, so there's no Bilbo coming. Do hit like, because I am seeing that a fair few people haven't. With that being said, though, let's get back into this. Let's see what kind of biblical ethic Vocab Malone, which again is not a real name. I refuse to believe that is a real name. Let's see what he's got for us.
That's simple. What happens is you have Adam and Eve in sort of a pristine environment in which...
Oh, I did forget. Rochina, out of all over Keller, I did use the money that you gave me for Mochi. I almost thought I wasn't going to be able to, because the place that I knew of with Mochi at the grocery store just didn't have anything there, and I was like, did they just stop carrying Mochi? And I got very sad. But then later in the ice cream aisle, I was looking around, and this woman in the aisle who was in front of the Mochi was like, what were you looking for? And I said, oh, Mochi. And then she moved her cart, and she was like, it's right here. And it was like the gates of heaven opened up, and an angelic choir sang down. And I got myself some horchata-flavored ice cream Mochi, which is the craziest multicultural mix, but I was there for it, and it was amazing.
I'm gonna walk over to H Mart at some point and see if they have horchata flavored mochi, because I need that.
Yes, it was amazing. Sanguine Rips Next Sonder for $4.99 says, the last common ancestor of any part of the extant genome was different in the past and will change as lineages combine and die out. Absolutely correct. All right, here we go.
They're not having to kill and work this way. They still have jobs to do. And all of that, they're exercising their co-regent function, if you want to put it that way, as those who bear the image of God.
This is an unsurprising blending of the two independent and distinct creation stories. I shouldn't say they're independent, but the two distinct creation stories in Genesis chapter 1 and 2 through 3 or 4. So yeah. Unsurprising.
Maya Atkinson says, Mochi is a gift from the baby Jesus? I mean, look, if there was anything that was going to convince...
No, it's a gift from the baby Jesus.
Yes. Well, at least if it's horchata. Yeah, if it's horchata Mochi, then yes. And baby Jesus.
Fall, disobedience, and it produces negative consequence. Ultimately, which leads to the flood, which leads to the world we see now. But my point is, when we look at the world, ladies and gentlemen, as a...
Wait, horchata mochi is the most American thing you've ever heard? I feel like it's the most, like, Mexican-Japanese fusion thing, but maybe that's a combo that you really only get in the United States. I don't know. Maybe that's what that is.
I don't know, because Japan has tiramisu Kit Kats, which are freaking delicious.
Why don't I have tiramisu Kit Kats?
Wow.
Man.
Oh, yeah. They were life-changing.
Look,
wow.
Japan, there's a lot of things I like and I don't like about Japan. I have mixed feelings about a lot of stuff from Japan. They've got that whole food thing pretty much on lock. I don't know what kind of crazy technology they have over there that lets them create the best flavor combinations, but like, yeah. Also, I noticed that
when you think about it, putting Kit Kats into like a tiramisu flavor, it's so freaking perfect. It's like the perfect
makes a lot of
format.
sense. I also did notice that my grocery store is now selling prepackaged onigiri, which is kind of weird to me because I'm not used to any place that isn't an Asian market selling onigiri. Like I'm just looking. It's like, oh yeah, hey look, there's some tuna onigiri, and I was like, really? And I look, and yeah, sure enough, it's tuna onigiri. So maybe I'll get some next time.
Christian, here's what you need to do. Understand, this ain't how it's supposed to be. The evolutionists can never look out on the landscape and say, that lion ripping apart that gazelle, that's not how it's supposed to be. They can't.
Evolution doesn't tell you anything about how things are supposed
there's no
to be.
supposed to be.
It's the same thing with like those globe earthers, those globe heads, those globe tards. They think that lions are supposed to eat gazelles and that the sun is supposed to set instead of shrink away. Yeah, I guess, sure.
Even within Christian theology, this is just I mean, this is what Christian theology is, right? Is just a perpetual misunderstanding of the text. So, this pristine wilderness or this pristine paradise, the fall, the consequences for sin. This is all made up. This is not in the text.
I'm also going to say that is not, those theological points are not universal in Christianity.
True.
So it is.
I can tell you quite a few of them. They're damn sure not in Judaism either. We don't believe in original sin. It's very liberating.
Very, very few things can be said to be universal in Christian theology. You can find Christian groups who will reject just about anything that these guys say, and that will accept various things that they say. So yeah.
Do that. They actually have to say, nothing's how it's supposed to be, but this is how it's pretty much always been. When it
well, that's because there's no supposed to. We know
has been.
Yeah, there's no supposed to. There's no goal.
We have
almost a correct statement, wasn't it?
Yeah, I guess technically, yeah. We'll take a drink for it. Why not? I'm thirsty. I've got another beer on standby. I can stand it.
Different story in the front and in the back. And so that's very important. What I mean by that is we have God who made Adam and Eve. No one's owning anyone. We're tending and doing.
I mean, except for God owning the humans, because that's
God owns humans,
consistent theology.
Adam.
Yeah.
So Adam and Eve are garden oblates, right? The garden that is in Eden is God's garden, not their garden. And their purpose is to work the garden and to keep the garden. They're palace slaves. They're temple slaves.
Better than some other kinds of slaves, but not slaves.
Right. Yes.
And even after the fall, God still said, you'll work by the sweat of your own brow. Even Abraham Lincoln understood that. That sounds like a verse for emancipation there.
Wow.
So
what?
Look, you know what? If Abraham Lincoln, and I don't know, maybe Abraham Lincoln used that verse as an argument against slavery, and you know what? I'm not going to say that he's not allowed to do that, but that is not the intended meaning by the author, nor is it how virtually anyone has taken that verse in all of history, aside maybe from Abraham Lincoln. Which again, he's welcome to take it that way, but we can't say that that's what the authors of the Bible were intending.
Sweat of your own brow. All right. And you look at that, and then you look at the book of Revelation. We got the front and the back. You go to the back page, so to speak.
You know, that ordering is arbitrary and was determined by Bible printers. Not even by just Christians broadly, but specifically by Bible printers.
And it's got a perfect city, garden-like conditions, paradise, where we're worshiping the Lord, no ownership of other humans, and that's what...
Or of anything else. Which
is that in there?
Well, so at least in Acts, there's the whole, the Christians held everything in common, which his type of Christian really doesn't seem to like very much. The whole common ownership. Nope. Not a big fan.
Nope. That's evil communist socialism.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Creation is heading towards is this culmination. So understand, we have the full story of you. We can say wasn't supposed to be how it is now, but it's going over here. And what the kingdom of Christ is supposed to do is to show
did I
that.
miss the part where God said it's okay to like eat other creatures, which requires killing them, or is he just brushing over that part?
I mean, he's certainly brushing over it, which is weird because creationists usually like to talk about that bit of Genesis where God says, now the animals will be food for you or whatever. And then, Noah makes a sacrifice and presumably eats a bunch of that sacrificial victim because, again, that's what you do with sacrifice. Sorry, Raw Matt, who likes to think that apparently all the sacrifices of the temple were not people eating meat. Because Raw Matt apparently just doesn't know that what you did, like what most of that meat went to was feeding either the priests or the people who brought the sacrificial victim to the temple. Yeah, because Raw Matt's a vegetarian. I don't know why I'm bringing up Raw Matt so much, but he keeps like being relevant to this discussion in the stupidest ways, which is just everything about him. It's the stupidest it could be. Roshina out of all over Keller for $1.99 says, "Drink for evil Marxism." You know what? I don't know because it wasn't the creationists who said it. And I don't know. Old man writer of Mensa's Guide to Fart Smelling for $5 says, obligatory super chat for getting to see my favorite YouTube dino on a live stream. Dapper and Vishanti aren't half
Duo.
Duo on a live stream, sorry. Dapper and Vishanti aren't half either. Thank you very much. Savage Pinnipedisaurus, so there's not an O, there's an A. Cobra for $5 says, don't believe everything you see on the internet. Abraham Lincoln, 1866. Yes. One of my favorite Lincoln quotes.
In the earth, and indeed,
also,
even
responding to a question in the chat, it was to Kip, but I'll answer it. They were asking, is your own brow a correct translation? And it is actually really close, because the Hebrew there is the sweat of your face, by the sweat of your face. So that's pretty close. That's as close as you can get. So
I'd agree. Yeah.
I was just typing that into the chat.
Alex Markle also says, "Are they going to eat our leftist asses?" Yes, thank you for the Alex Jones reference. I still find that clip hilarious. I will eat your leftist ass, and then my favorite.
I didn't know Alex Jones is into eating the booty like groceries, but go off. I guess.
My favorite thing about that is that when he was called out about that, his response was like, "No, I meant cannibalism." It's like, dude.
That's worse.
He does
worse, right? Worse, right?
I know. He's like, no, I was talking
cool,
about,
Vish.
It wasn't analingus, it was cannibalism. Like, oh, it all makes sense now. Geez,
yeah,
dude. In what world is cannibalism better?
In what world is cannibalism a better option than eating ass? I don't understand.
Oh man.
I can't.
Hey, it seems like InfoWars is not long for this world, and you know what? Good.
Oh no.
Yeah. Yeah, it looks like he's gonna have to sell off not just his personal assets, but also everything the free speech system owns.
Oh no.
DM Google Debunker Wing for $2 says, communism is a red herring. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Old Testament Israel did that. Deuteronomy 27:19. Cursed be anyone who perverts the justice due to the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow.
Yeah, but
none of those do slaves.
You know what? I have a feeling that if that verse is to be taken at face value, a lot of his compatriots are going to have a lot of answering to do for their stance on immigrant rights.
Yeah. But also, one of the things I want to get to, which is similar to what Kip is getting to, is like what justice is due to people depends in the Old Testament on their social standing within the hierarchy of that society, right? Now, a lot of the idea behind these laws, right, is to say that, hey, people often mistreat these particular downtrodden types of people, right? Like the sojourner, the orphans, widows, because they have trouble supporting themselves because their traditional position within the hierarchy is not currently functioning for them, right? A sojourner, that's because they're not at home, so they don't have the support network that they're used to with their, countrymen, their family, all that stuff. With the orphans and the widow, it's because the patriarch of that family, the one who is supposed to be the one who is providing for that family, is no longer there. So
Yeah.
therefore, their primary means of support is now absent. So on the one hand, yes, it's to say, hey, you know, people are do things because of the social hierarchy, and when people fall outside of that for various reasons, we need to make sure that they don't just, you know, become destitute. But again, what is due to people is primarily judged by where they should be in this hierarchy of power and authority and control over other groups of people. And the people at the bottom are not due as much. There's a reason why there are different levels of crime and punishment for killing, say, a slave versus killing a freeborn person. It's not the same thing. Wings of Shoe for $2 says, did God also turn the frogs gay? No, those were the chemicals in the water. The weirdest thing about that is, like, the chemicals turning the frogs gay was actually the closest he ever got to actually being right, because there were actually studies coming out about, like, atrazine or something, was that the name of the chemical? But there were actual studies about it changing sex ratios in frogs, and that was a weird thing. Turns out that the studies on further investigation probably weren't actually true. It was probably, an incorrect result, which happens. But at least that result was somewhere there. There was a there on that one. Although that there was there did not require him to dress up in a gay frog costume on Halloween. That was a choice he made all on his own. For $4.99, Roshna, out of all over Keller, says, why do Dapper streams always involve discussions on cannibalism? Not that I'm complaining. Yeah, well, maybe it's my drink triggers.
Cannibalism is just a red herring.
Yeah.
And all this ultimately is based upon the image of God. God looks out for those who cannot help.
It's not.
Mm-mm.
It's not. Like, you can't just arbitrarily select this idea of the image of God and apply it wherever you want to see it. That's not how this works.
Yeah.
There's no direct connection between this text in Deuteronomy 27:19 and Genesis 1:26 and 27. There's none.
Yeah.
No, but you see,
I can guarantee you that if the author meant that connection to be there, they would have written it in.
They make those connections, right?
In other passages, they make connections directly.
Well, you gotta remember, this is the kind of
instance,
sorry.
They're the passages about food. It's like, hey, don't eat these different types of food. You shall be holy, for the Lord your God is holy. And it ties it directly into, like, that theology. When it says, hey, don't oppress the stranger because you were strangers in Egypt, or if it's like, hey, don't do this thing, I am the Lord your God. It doesn't have any qualms about tying that into a theology. So if they wanted to use everyone's created in the image of God, so you shouldn't oppress people, they would have said it directly.
Yeah. Instead, what it's usually tied back to in these cases is tied back to the treatment of the Israelites under Egyptian ownership. And okay, at least the thing is that's actually one of the things that bugs me, right? You could at least make a better case that by tying it back to oppression under Egypt, in which the idea was that the Hebrews were enslaved, that right there is an anti-slavery point. It's a better argument. It's not a good argument. It doesn't actually work, but at least there's something to look at there.
There's something that Kip said on a stream a few weeks ago that really stuck with me. It's not that God was opposed to slavery. It's just that he didn't like Israel being other people's slaves because they're his slaves. Yeah. He says that in the text, you're mine.
The text is explicit about that.
Yeah. I don't think it's a good argument, but at least it's an argument that actually looks at the text in question and is not just randomly importing some bit of Genesis. Right? It's a better argument. It's not a good argument. It's just less terrible.
Themselves and his people are supposed to do the same. You go over to the New Testament, Matthew 25:40. Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me. By the way,
okay, sure, buddy.
Here's a fun fact.
Why did it take Christians in America 1,800 years to figure that one out?
1,800 years in America? I don't think I think you might have some timelines crossed there. There weren't Christians in America for 1,800 years.
Why did it take Christians in America,
right,
1,800 years?
It didn't.
Because Christians, period,
It took them like 400
in other
years.
regions. Listen to me finish. Christians all over the world stopped slavery at different times. America did it much later than a lot of other countries. Mexico had us beat by like 40 years. So why did it take the American Christians so long to figure that out?
Olivia Williams for $2.79 Beaver Bucks says, "Can I eat the long pork now with a Ghidorah?" So first we'll drink for the Ghidorah, but also no, don't eat the long pork.
That's true.
But also, I want to point out that
This is-
it is. I want to point
This
out
is this is the worst kind of proof texting, right? Like he's just pulling Bible verses. This is not much better than, you know, closing your eyes and flipping over your Bible and putting your finger on wherever it lands. These are the kind of tangential connections that he's attempting.
And this section doesn't actually explicitly talk about slavery one way or the other anyway. Right? It's talking about things like feeding people who show up who are hungry, visiting prisoners in prison.
People in jail.
Yeah, which
clothing,
like, look, I'm not going to tell you not
clothes.
to do any of those things. Those are all good things to do, you know, helping the needy, comforting those in prison, all good stuff. But none of it is, and don't have slaves. That's nowhere in this section. And you would think that if the Bible is definitely an anti-slavery book, you'd think you could come up with a verse that actually says something about slavery being bad per se. Donald Jaramillo, I don't know why I said Jared. Donald Jaramillo for $2 says, "I once made mock chili con hombre for a cook-off." Oh, awesome.
The puns.
Young Lady Novelist for $1.99 says, "Communism is the red herring. Rip Martin Mull." Yes, rest in peace, Martin Mull.
Yeah, the green.
Wait, that verse was commonly used, Eric, by abolitionists. They would commonly use that for 2540.
I mean, I don't actually know. It wouldn't surprise me if it were, but that's a separate question. Was it used by abolitionists is not the same question as does the Bible support slavery?
Nope.
Of course, Christians, abolitionists are going to find verses that they think support them. All Christians end up doing that.
Was it used by 1st and 2nd century abolitionists?
Were there any 1st and 2nd century abolitionists? Doesn't seem like it. I know, again, I'm sure that someone's going to find some saint something or other from some monastery who wrote a polemic against slavery. That's great.
And it doesn't matter because that person didn't have influence over all of Christendom.
Yeah. Jake, insert clever Dapper inside joke here, Nelson, for $10 says, "One cannibal to another."
Mustard, thank you, Jillian. Damn it.
One cannibal to another, "I hate my mother-in-law." The other one said, "Here, try mine." Nice.
This joke works on multiple levels.
Yeah. It's a pretty good joke.
Very good. Yeah.
Because it would say, who's the least of these in this wicked society? It's the enslaved person who's been stripped of all their rights and dignity. The least of these. We need to do right by them.
And look,
and your folks don't.
But here's the thing. In order to take that and then say that the Bible therefore doesn't support slavery, what you have to do is say that this is the part of the Bible that counts, and the part that is regulating slavery as if it's an everyday thing are the parts that just don't count. And if you're taking parts of the Bible and saying they don't count, then you're not really engaging with the text and saying what the text says. You're doing something else.
They're also, taking for granted. They're importing this idea of what that even means, doing right by these people, and assuming that doing right by the slave in this context means setting them free. When within the ancient world, that's not necessarily the correct answer.
Doing right by a slave is not necessarily manumission in terms of first century Roman Empire. No. Now, that's an option in first century Roman Empire, right? Like, people were manumitted and was generally
pretty rare, though.
It was pretty rare. It was generally seen as a praiseworthy thing to do. Like, you got props for like, oh, hey, you were nice to your slaves when you didn't have to be. Although eventually the Roman Empire was like, hey, too many people are manumitting slaves. We're just going to outlaw that now. We're just not. Can't do it. My
economy.
Yeah, basically.
Right.
But yeah, like what was due to slaves was different, right? Like you did owe your slaves things, right? Like we have historical precedent for people being like, hey, this is a bad guy because he treats his slaves harshly. In fact, famously, there's a story about a Roman Empire who went to a farm, like, you know, a latifundium, and saw how this guy was treating his slaves, and one of his house slaves messed up at dinner, and he ordered his house slaves thrown to the eels because he had a cistern full of freshwater eels. Or, you know, he would feed them and then eat them later. And so the emperor was like, no, we're going to throw you to the eels. And so he had the owner of the latifundium thrown to the eels. But the thing is, that's not an abolitionist stance. That is a, hey, slavery's okay, but you can't treat them as if they're just dirt. Which is not the same thing. There were also laws about not abusing slaves in antebellum South. They were infrequently enforced, but they were there because even then, the fiction that people were telling themselves is that, you know, the slave owner is a fatherly figure who's trying to educate and uplift these poor savages from the dark continent.
A really poor argument to be like, well, the Bible says that you have to treat people nice, therefore the people treated them nice. Yeah, well, the laws here say that you're not supposed to cheat on your taxes. People cheat on their taxes all the time.
Yeah. And even
having a law doesn't mean it didn't exist.
Right. And the thing is, even then, even if the law was followed all the time, being a relatively nice slave owner doesn't negate the fact that you're still enslaving people. It's still not okay. Let's see. Savage Pinnipetasaurus Cobra for $5 says, what was Confederate Lieutenant General Leonidas Polk's civilian job again? Wasn't he a pig farmer? Is that what it is? Was he a pig farmer? Roshina, out of all over Keller for $4.99 says, the least of these only works if you consider them people. So many slavers didn't consider slaves to even be people. Now, I would argue that the Bible does put slaves in a different category than just brute beasts. It has separate laws regarding, like, your cattle versus your slaves, and whatnot. So while there is chattel slavery in the Bible and there's other kinds of slavery, I don't think it puts them in the same category.
It's not based on a philosophy of, or an anthropology, which, you know, separates different types of people into higher or lower classes of human or creatures. Slavery in antiquity didn't really have anything to do with views on the value, or I guess the differences, the inherent differences, the intrinsic differences between different types of people. It was just about winners and losers, really. You
got unlucky. Your god wasn't as good as my god, or my army was better than your army, or things like that, right? It was, in fact, you can actually see this this is going out of field for the Bible, but you can see this very heavily with the Stoics. One thing is, like, the Stoics were famous for how well they treated their slaves, in part because they had an explicit idea that slavery was a matter of luck, and that therefore your slaves weren't worse than you. They were just unlucky. But that doesn't mean you had to not keep them as slaves. Stoics had slaves. Nope. Yeah. They were just generally nicer to them than other people were. Which, I mean, I'm not going to say that's not an improvement, but it's still not okay. Because one of the themes that I'm seeing with this episode, this whole thing, is like, basically the entire discourse about biblical slavery is to say, well, it's not as bad as, and then pick one of the worst examples of slavery in history. Yeah. Which, like,
doesn't make it not bad, though.
Right. It's sort of like, well, I didn't stab you in the heart, I only stabbed you in the thigh. It's like, yeah, but you could have just not stabbed me at all. Like, that was always an option.
Exactly.
So that's important to understand. And of course, Jesus Christ tells the story of the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter.
Who's not a slave. I'm just taking a drink. I have no idea.
I was just going to say,
yeah, this is not about a slave.
I just noticed that the Urban Apologist has this nice urban New York City backdrop for his slideshow.
It kind of looks like a pride backdrop.
It kind of does, right?
Yeah. Hey, you know what? It does. Vocab, I disagree with you about a lot, but if this is your nod to Pride, because I do believe this aired in June, then hey, you know what? Props to you, man. I'm happy that you went with the Pride background. It's low key and kind of subversive, given that you're on Eric's show, so I approve. I am just going to assume that that's what vocab is doing because it's going to make me feel better about him.
You're right.
And you know what? Until he tells me otherwise, I'm just going to go with vocab Malone is celebrating Pride Month right now.
You're a good person, dinosaur.
Look, I don't want to go around hating everyone I cover, so I'm just going to take it. I'm just going to go with it. It's
They're 10. This is so fundamental. The application of this story alone would destroy what slavery was, because what everybody always wants to do is.
oh,
It literally didn't do that. It literally, in documented history, did not do that.
like, look, I at least understood what most of the connections he was trying to draw are. I don't even get it with this. I just don't. DM Google Conqueror Wing for $2 says Pride Month all year long. Look,
It is a vocab's house.
well, yeah, there you go. Maybe vocab is an all year Pride guy. But look, I don't ever think that Pride is not around, but I do acknowledge that June is Pride Month, and that if every month is Pride Month, then no month is Pride Month. So,
Be neighbor their neighbor. That's why when the guy says to Jesus, "What's the great command?" And he says, "Love God, number 1, love your neighbor, number 2." He says, actually, who's my neighbor? Jesus tells a story making the
Not slaves.
yeah, Jesus could have told a story about a slave coming across this guy, and
He
helping
could
him.
have.
He didn't.
breed in the society.
Also, this is one of those things that if Christians knew literally anything about the way that Judaism works or the way that our dialogues work, they would read this story differently, because whenever you're bringing up a scenario in Jewish discourse, you define your terms, you set parameters. And that's exactly what the guys in that story were doing to Jesus. Like, he talks about your neighbor, and the first question they ask him isn't trying to trick him. It's a Jewish response. Well, who's my neighbor? You need to define who my neighbor is so that I understand what you're talking about. Because if every human on the planet is my neighbor, then why do you have a special word for neighbor? That's just everybody. So you're specifically referring to people that have a different word, a different label. Tell me who qualifies. And then he goes into the story as a way to answer them. So you miss so much by not having any context there. But
Carrie Bronson for $10 says, I don't want to go around hating everyone I cover, end quote. This is why you're one of my favorite of your genre. Well, thank you, first of all. I really do appreciate that. That means a lot. Also, I often end up doing it anyway. So, because there's a lot of really big assholes in the world of young earth creationism.
Yeah,
there is. Yeah.
I think it's one of those areas that well, actually, this isn't even I think, right? There are certain professions that attract people with cluster B personality disorders, and pastor is one of them, and this is just a stone throw away from that, right? Religious leader is one of them. Now that does not mean that a majority of religious leaders have cluster B personality disorder. I don't think that's true. However, they're overrepresented among such people. So, but then again, it's the same with business leaders, politicians. These are all areas. Basically, any area where you have power over people that is institutionally recognized, you're going to attract an overrepresentation of people with cluster B personality disorder.
A lower caste person who they viewed as confused and they want to have nothing to do with it by and large in that society at that time, making them the hero of the story. This would be the equivalent.
Isn't that how most of this guy's peers view homeless folks?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Or now, not vocab apparently, but most of his other peers, they would also treat the LGBT plus community that way too.
I want to hear this spot on analogy that he's about to draw.
Yeah.
He just said this would be like us.
It's
here we go.
The 1940s in the rural Alabama, and I have some family in Alabama, so I'm not picking on Alabama.
He went for 1940s, and I thought he was going to go for that German group, but instead he's just throwing Alabama.
What is he
saying? Some crazy stuff happened there, especially then, and making that hero of the story a black man. And then
no. First of all, okay, I'm going to take it.
My man. My man, first of all, you're like 20 years off in terms of time period where that analogy would work.
Yeah, because in the 1940s, they weren't slaves. But here's another thing.
Yeah, it would have been the 1960s that he's thinking of, not the 1940s.
Yeah, but there's another thing. The degree to which there was animosity between Jewish people and Samaritans in the first century is a bit overblown, right? Like, we have extensive literature about like how to properly have a Samaritan over for a meal, which wouldn't be a thing unless Jewish people were contemplating having significant amounts of fellowship with their Samaritan neighbors, because having a meal in that context is a pretty significant thing. Jews generally didn't share meals with Gentiles. And so the fact that there are regulations about like, oh, hey, you can let the Samaritan say the blessing over the meal, but don't say amen until he's finished, lest he say a blessing for Mount Gerizim, in which case you should withhold your amen. Right? So you gotta wait. But like, he can give the blessing, it's fine. That is not something that you do with some category of people who are just universally despised. So the idea that the Samaritan is just a completely hated, othered category is not entirely accurate. There's clearly a distinction drawn, right? Because they're not just treated like every other Jewish person. But they're also not treated as if they're just Gentiles like the Romans or the Greeks. Sorry,
yeah.
No, I was going to say it is kind of a if this is a story that in any way, shape, or form you want to trace back to something said by the historical Jesus, it does set it into an interesting framework when you consider that, you know, Jesus, geographically speaking, was from, you know, sort of the outskirts of Samaria.
Yeah,
Come on.
Yeah, Nazareth is right near where it's not far from like Mount Gerizim and the major population centers for
That's
Samaritans.
unwelcome nuance.
Well, I mean, I personally think
is.
that the more important aspect of all that is that the people who weren't acting neighborly were like primarily members of like the religious establishment, because to a large extent, Jesus was sort of an anti-establishment kind of guy. He wasn't a big fan of the temple hierarchy and whatnot. And so while
Which, ironically, it makes him anti-Sadducee, not anti-Pharisee, because the Sadducees were the religious elite, not the Pharisees.
I mean, Jesus would have been considered a Pharisee by his contemporaries. But,
he was pretty close.
Right, but that's also why he was constantly in dialogue with Pharisees, because they talked to each other a lot. They had discussions. They had debates. Yes. Jesus makes the most sense in the context of being a Pharisee itinerant rabbi.
You're not getting a lot of audiences with the Sadducee.
Yeah, no. The Sadducees primarily maintain their power as a result of support from the Roman state, because they were in charge of the temple, which was under the patronage of the Roman Empire. And so that was why that's one of the reasons why they almost completely disappear not long after the temple goes away, because their only source of authority was their control over the temple infrastructure and the temple rituals. Once that's gone, the Pharisees are still around.
They have a job.
And the Pharisees were never tied to the temple hierarchy or ritual in terms of why they were seen as authoritative.
Not that way.
So anyway, here we go.
Enslaved or recently a descendant of enslaved person, making them the hero of the story and saying, be like that Samaritan, be like that outer caste person. And so we got to understand what the biblical ethic ultimately is. Now, I want to
look, if you want to make the argument, the Bible says that people who are not normally seen as highly regarded in their current social hierarchies are still people who are capable of doing good things and being used by God for his purposes. I mean, yeah, that's a big theme. But again, that is not a therefore slavery bad theme. That is not what's happening here. That is a different theme, right? Pointing out that like various outsiders, in fact, even sometimes people who weren't Jews, are treated as the protagonists of stories or as people who did praiseworthy things at various points in the Bible. That's true. But that's not the same thing as therefore slavery bad. Those are separate things. In fact, you can even have a story where the slave is the good person in the story. That still is not an anti-slavery story. Those are different ideas. And it kind of bugs me how obvious this is.
Any passage that says be kind to people and go, see, that's anti-slavery. No, it's not.
Yeah, the thing is, if you ask the average antebellum Southern plantation owner whether or not he should be, like, people should be kind to each other, they're all going to say yes. All of them. People do not, typically most people are not like cartoonish Disney villains twirling mustaches and wondering just how miserable they can make everyone else. Most people think of themselves as kind, generous people, even to people they're currently oppressing.
Yep.
Like, that's a thing that
they're like, well, we could have oppressed you harder.
Yeah. Or, like, one of the things you look at, like, since this guy wants to really talk about antebellum South, right, look at American slavery. One of the primary excuses that slave owners gave was the paternalistic idea that I talked about earlier, where they saw themselves as helping civilize these
But we're making their
savages.
lives better.
Yeah,
Right. I mean, they could
Yeah.
be back having malaria and dying in a different kind of plantation. Like, okay, great. That doesn't make you right. Carrie Bronson for $2 says, has he not heard of the model? Sorry. Has he not heard of the model minority trope? Yeah, there's that, right? That's a whole big thing. Is
He might, but I doubt he internalized anything from it.
Right? Like, a way to keep oppression going is to point to so-called exemplars of the good and then fill in the blank, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that, usually that person who's said to be the good fill in the blank with some kind of oppressed minority is said to be that because while usually actually showing good character traits, they also do not rock the boat of the establishment under which they're suffering.
Yeah,
an important aspect
and
of
it's
the good
also a
minority.
way to continue to control the way people define themselves, because if you're doing it for them, they don't get to have that kind of self-determination. This is me
Strawberry,
off.
fifth super chat vein for $5 says, better late than never. Hi, Vishanti. Hi, Dr. Kip. Hi, Dapper's Human Suit. Hello. And that, of course, is Strawberry's, like, 131st fifth super chat.
Yeah. There's asking me, with my Southern heritage, were you a daughter of the Confederacy? No, I never had any inclination to join the Daughters of the Confederacy.
That's probably good. Do you actually have any ancestors that would, like, even count? I feel like you don't.
On my father's side, yes.
Okay.
Quote someone here who's an apologist that does good work on this, Dr. H.C. Felder. He says, not only is
Are we
Christianity...
just talking about model minorities?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Far from being a slave religion, so the accusation is, oh, this is just a religion given to people to oppress them. This is coming into the modern era now. But Christianity set men and women of every ethnicity free physically and spiritually.
It didn't, though.
Historically, that's just not accurate.
It was literally described as a religion for women and slaves. This guy does not know his history. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, look.
Oh my goodness.
If you want to make an argument that there's some significant reason why the countries that tended to do away with slavery first had a Christian history, okay, look, have that discussion, but it's not the same discussion. And I don't think it's going to go the way that you want it to, because they didn't tend to have those abolitionist movements until after the Enlightenment, which was, at a simplistic stance, a lot of it was about reducing the authority of Christianity in a country. That's what a lot of Enlightenment stuff was. But here's the thing, like, historically, it's just not true. When countries became Christian historically, by whatever means, they did not tend to then just abolish slavery. It is very hard to find historically any examples of Christianity per se just ending slavery. Now, that's not to say that Christians, pastors, were not big parts of abolition movements when they occurred. They absolutely were in many cases. I don't want to pretend that that's not true. But they had to deprioritize the same parts of the Bible that their oppositions were prioritizing in order to justify slavery. And the anti-abolition side had an easier time of it. It is very easy to point to, hey, the Bible has rules for how to properly treat slaves. Therefore, the Bible is okay with slavery. That's an easy argument. And you know what? It's pretty compelling. Well, the Bible does have rules about slavery, but that's because of, and then you have like a subsequent like hour-long sermon saying how like, yeah, but anyway, what it really meant, that's a much harder argument to make. I'm glad that some people made it.
Like, especially the fact that two of the monarchs whose like title was the Catholic, plus their compatriot in Portugal, when the Spanish monarchs and the Portuguese monarch found, quote unquote, the New World, they're like, wow, check out all these resources. We're going to need some slave labor. Better start the transatlantic slave trade.
Yep. Yeah, the transatlantic slave trade was basically done by Christian. Now, not every step of it was, right? A lot of it tied into previous slave trades that were not really anything to do with Christianity that had already been going on in Africa. But the new demand certainly upped the intensity of those slave trading operations in Africa.
Yeah, and like, again, this is one of my fields of specialty, like, study, is when you colonize the, like, Western Hemisphere and your Christian monarchs, and you forbid any religion but Christianity from going there, and you're also importing slaves, like, I can't help but think that you're fine with the slavery part. But it's not actually just an intrinsic part of Christianity that it sets men and women of every ethnicity free physically and spiritually. I can't help but think that's a load of crap.
Thylaco Leon Kennedy says, would it be wholly incorrect that it was mostly Christian countries that initiated slavery in the first place? I would say that that is at least almost entirely incorrect. I can't think of
slavery
any place...
existed before Christianity.
It's just I mean, it literally was just
essentially universal.
Just a fact of life in most parts of certainly within the Western world, since basically as far back as you can.
Yeah, I can't think of any place that didn't have slaves, then started having slaves after Christians arrived. I don't think that's ever happened. Yeah. So yeah, I'm not.
Slavery existed before Christianity ever existed, so it's not.
I don't think you can lay the institution of slavery at the feet of any current religion. I don't think that any religion started slavery that's currently existing. Yeah. So now, that doesn't mean that they don't have differences in how they treat the institution and the people who suffer under it. They certainly do. And I would say that Christianity does not have exactly, a wonderful track record on this. But yeah, no, as far as I can tell, Christianity never started slavery anywhere. I mean, I guess one of the problems is that before Europeans start settling in what is now the South, the native populations had already been drastically reduced by plague, that no one outside of those native populations really knew about. So we don't really have a great sense of what their societies were like before the plague wiped out like 90% of them, and by plague I mean smallpox. Because remember that smallpox spreads into Central and South America by the Spanish, but then it quickly, before any real settlement in North America takes place, ravages the vast majority of North Americans' native population in the decades just before Europeans start settling like the Eastern Seaboard in what's now the United States and Canada. And so the societies that those Europeans encounter are not the societies that existed just a century ago. They are very different. They are now dealing with what's essentially a post-apocalyptic situation.
Oh my god, yeah. And like literally I watched a video on this talking about like how it was like almost 1 million people in just like what we now think of as Mexico that were just completely obliterated by smallpox. It literally just wildfired through the population.
I mean,
insane.
So that's one of the things is you might argue like, well, there's not a whole lot of evidence of the peoples of like the Eastern Seaboard having a slave based economy or anything like that, and they might not have. I don't know. In which case, you could say that I guess Christians did introduce slavery to the South there, but we also just don't know because we don't know what those societies were like because they were basically completely collapsed by the time Europeans started writing down their observations about them. So anyway, here we go.
.org. And some of my slides are inspired by his presentation on this, as well as my friend
Roshina out of all over Keller for 199 says, what about African colonizers? Yeah, the thing is that slavery was ubiquitous throughout Africa before Europeans colonized it. There was slavery all across Africa. Now, colonizers did change how it operated in some cases, and also later in some cases got rid of it, which you might argue maybe it wouldn't have been got rid of had it not been for them. I don't know. I don't want to speculate about alt history. But I can say that colonizers, by and large, did not bring slavery to Africa. Plus, foreign slavers were around in Africa long before Europeans started doing it, because the Arabs have a long history of slave raids in Africa that goes back farther than the European involvement in the African slave trade. So
I'm having trouble thinking of a continent where slavery didn't exist in a society.
Antarctica.
In a society.
That's a continent.
Penguins have societies, gosh darn it.
In a society.
Oh,
Okay.
like I said,
attention.
penguins have a society. All
They
right.
don't have a human society.
You didn't say human society. You said society.
However, penguins are sociopaths.
Well,
Stand on that.
dinosaurs count too.
Peter from LA. I also want to give credit to him for some of the elements in here. Is he a real one? Shout out to those two gentlemen and the work they do. Now, let's compare.
Oh, now we're going with harsh slavery.
Harsh
so there's
slavery.
non-harsh slavery and harsh slavery.
The big
This is
distinction.
where I think that you should maybe stop it, because I'm going to get really pissed off
Well, I do want to point out.
And- off at this.
So, slave owners have complete rights over the slave has almost never been the case in any society ever, including the antebellum South. There were things it was illegal to do to your slaves in the antebellum South. Now, does that mean that those laws were enforced? Not very often, but that's also true all over the world. Let's see, property. Yep, that's a part of
Also,
biblical slavery.
the
Slaves,
whole thing of harsh slavery where it was permanent, I'm like, look, even if you're a slave for 6 months, you're still a slave. That doesn't make it not harsh. That's
but one of the things I want to point
ridiculous.
out is most of these things are part of biblical slavery. Just not
Yeah.
always for for
Yeah,
Israelites, right? So like
Yeah.
Like
being
the
property-
crazy the other way to look at this is as far as someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he's drawing this stuff harsh slavery for Christian apologetics. Always the antebellum South, right? That's the model that they're drawing from. But there was still, I expect there was still allowances for indentured servitude or debt slavery.
Yeah.
In the
I mean,
antebellum South as
look,
well.
the Americas had
right?
indentured servitude all over the place.
Sure.
And it doesn't make it okay. It's like, oh, well, you're a slave, but you're only a
doesn't.
slave for like 7 years. How about being a slave for no years?
Yeah, but what I want to go through is I want to go through these and point out which ones did and didn't apply to biblical slavery. So property definitely applies to biblical slavery.
Definitely applied.
Non-Israelite slaves were called your silver or your money or your property in the Old
Yeah,
Testament,
you can
right?
pass them down to your kids.
Your achuza.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So slave owners have complete rights over the slave. That's not even a part of antebellum slavery. That's not a part of any slavery that I'm aware of. Now, again, like I said, were these laws, restrictions honored more in the breach than in, following? Yeah, often, but that's still the case, right? Slaves restricted from education. This one I do believe is fairly unique to the antebellum South, but one of the things I want to point out, it was not universal either geographically or in terms of time. This was a thing that happened in part of that. So I don't know of any laws in the Bible against educating your slaves.
Well, what does he mean by education in this instance?
So in the antebellum South, in certain areas, slaves were forbidden to be taught how to read. It was illegal to teach your slaves to read.
So it's within the Iron Age, Israel, people just didn't learn how to read.
But I don't know that there was a law restricting slaves specifically. From learning.
That's okay.
Like
sure.
if you're like, hey, I'm sending my slave to scribal school, I don't think people might be like, well, that's weird, but I don't think there was like a rule against
Probably.
it.
Also, this isn't related to anything, but I have window clings that when the sun starts to set, it casts little rainbows
I see that.
on my wall. So like right where I keep all of my
That's cool. Yeah.
eyes of Agamotto, the sun will come in through this window behind me and
very cool.
make little.
So slave restricted of his identity. I mean, that's true in slavery generally. Once you become someone's slave, even in the case of debt slavery, your primary identity is that you are owned by the person who owns you. That you are that person's slave. That becomes your basic identity in the Bible and not. Slavery not optional is also a part of biblical slavery. When those people were taken as slaves as a result of losing a war, they didn't get a choice.
Even within debt slavery.
Yeah, it was
like
not really
what do people imagine the alternative here is? If you're indebted to someone to such a degree that you have to sell yourself into slavery, that's the option, right? Like that's it. That is it. You don't have a choice. That's what you have to do.
Roshan out of all over Keller for $4.99 says, does that mean slaves sometimes had more rights than women? I'm not aware of any society where I think it would be reasonable to say that slaves had more rights than free women. I mean, yeah, I'm not sure. Most societies didn't technically restrict women from learning to read either. I know that it did happen in Japan, but most societies, it's just like you just didn't bother with the expense of training women to read.
It's really weird.
Yeah, like, but that's also not. It doesn't mean that women didn't learn to read. One thing is we do have a tendency to overestimate the lack of literacy in ancient cultures. Like we have like little letters and whatnot jotted down by like soldiers and whatnot, and like by farmers and things like that. So like it's not like, especially if you have an alphabet. Alphabets are much easier.
In the Bar Kokhba,
we know that there were literate women like Sappho the poet.
Yeah.
So
what we're
in the Bar Kokhba, in the Bar Kokhba archive, we actually have a collection of letters and documents belonging to a woman by the name of Babata.
Yeah. So and also when I say that women were restricted from learning to read in Japan, it didn't work because they just invented their own syllabary and started writing anyway. So
nice.
You know.
Checkmate.
Yeah. So even when you say like, oh, the slaves or the women or whatever aren't allowed to learn how to read, it doesn't ever work. Like they still do.
Life finds a way.
Yeah. Because one of the things is the only way to really restrict people from learning how to read effectively is to just have a completely obtuse way of writing, like extensive logography. If you have anything that even approximates speech sounds, people will either figure out how to read or they'll just invent their own way to write. Savage Pinnipedisaurus Cobra for $2 says, also literacy is a spectrum rather than a binary. Also very true.
Very true.
Take a look at Kent
Very
Hovind.
important.
Clearly he can read words out, but he does not display any extensive literacy skills.
Yes.
So slavery permanent. So this is also a part of biblical slavery. It's not a part of biblical debt slavery per the laws in the Bible. But again, the slaves that you take from the nations around you are your property in perpetuity, as are their descendants, according to the Bible. So we're a little bit over time, and I'm going to end it. We're not going to continue to play more of this. But I do want to point out that his definitions of harsh slavery are very descriptive of at least some of the slavery that is endorsed by the Bible. Sorry, that's just how it is.
And also not accurately descriptive of slavery in the antebellum South.
Right, yes. At least one of these things was never the case in the antebellum South, that slave owners had complete rights over their slave, and the restrictor from education is only sometimes accurate regarding the antebellum South. So yeah, and those are the only places where, well, the education is the only real big difference that we have that applied to the antebellum South that probably didn't really apply to ancient Israelite slavery, even though, yeah, there probably weren't too many ancient Israelite slaves from foreign nations or debt slaves who were taught to read. Strawberry, 5th Super Chat vein for $5 says, Vishanti reminding us to stop and spell the rainbows with a rainbow emoji and a heart and a star emoji. Alright guys, that is where we're going to leave off. We're going to hear his take on all of these things next time. The current plan is for that to be Saturday. Kip is invited, Vishanti is invited. I think, so Dr. Josh is going to be getting the link. I can't guarantee how long or if he'll be here for that. He does have another show that day, so you know, we'll see how we'll play that by ear and see how it goes.
There's a good chance that he'll be here for.
I just don't want to say
chunk of it. I think.
I just don't want to say that he definitely will be here because he wants to and he thinks he will be. But you know, if he isn't, that's okay too. He is allowed to not be here. So let's see. Love Your Music says, same goes for deaf people in sign language. Vocal communication, it just isn't going to happen. Stop it. I'm not sure I follow. I don't know what the connection is there. Let me know what the connection there is, because I think I missed something, the context there.
I wonder if he's talking about attempting to restrict education. And I
you
don't know.
Certainly shouldn't try to restrict education for deaf people, which is a thing that does seem to happen a lot. Or you get things where like hearing communities try to impose their own version of sign language onto deaf people, which never really goes very well. Like, did you know that in the United States there's a community of educators for deaf people who want to try to get people to sign sign language as if it were grammatically just English, which is extremely
not how
awkward
that
and
works.
dumb. Yeah, it's
That's weird. Wow.
Unsurprisingly, it leads to worse educational outcomes for deaf students.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Russian out of all over Keller for $4.99 says, think either Vocab or Eric would use the Bible to speak out against today's indentured slavery? I don't know.
These guys seem like the type to say this is the good kind.
This is the good
slavery.
kind. This isn't the harsh kind.
Yeah.
Right? So it's good. It's a noble maybe a better economic system than we have today. So
Triceratops is saying that deaf people will invent their own sign language if oralism is forced on them. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, signed exact English is not ASL. That's true.
Yeah, signed English is not ASL.
I was sloppy in saying that. A lot of the nouns and verbs are taken from ASL, but it's not ASL. Nicholas Brody for $1.99 sends a first super chat with nothing on. Thank you so much for this first super chat. I really do appreciate that. All right. Let's get out of here. Everyone, let's take a look at what's coming up. First, Vishanti, what do you got coming up?
Doctor Strange comic review, specifically requested by Joshua Geese. That's what my most immediate project's going to be.
All right. Let's see. Wing of Shu for $5 says, in medieval age, the church only considered Latin as literate. There was a post-Roman simplified language commoners learned. Yeah, but I think by modern definitions of literacy, those people in the Middle Ages who were able to write and read in their own native languages, I would consider those people literate at least a basic level. And I would say that even today, if you can't read at least a little bit of Latin, can you really call yourself literate? I mean, really? Obviously not. All right, Kip, what do you got coming up for us?
Tomorrow's big.
Nice
I've got a stream at 10 o'clock Eastern. No, sorry, 10 o'clock Pacific time.
10 o'clock Pacific time.
Thank you. No, hell, please, no, not.
So I was about to say.
All right. So yes, 10 o'clock Pacific time, everyone. And I am going to be simulcasting with my friend Zach Miller, who runs it's a Christian YouTube channel called What Your Pastor Didn't Tell You, and a former colleague and a friend, Dr. Joel Karitko, and we're going to be reviewing a discussion that I had with the one and only Amon Hillman from about a year ago.
Ooh, okay, yeah.
It's gonna be spicy, guys. It's gonna be spicy.
Yeah, look, Amon Hillman makes Eric Hovind look like a Old Testament scholar.
It kind of does.
Yeah, and that. Yeah.
I like. I get the appeal, like, because he is an entertainer, and he's kind of a mystic, I think, but a scholar, Amon Hillman is not.
Yeah, no, he's not. All right, so let's see what's coming up on this channel. So tomorrow over on my other channel, currently we plan to play Power Rangers, Jungle Beasts. It is going to be, I think, episode like 30.
That was 10 o'clock a.m. by the way. 10 o'clock in the morning.
All right. So yeah, it's going to be episode like, I think it's 36. Okay, I think it's that 36. So we have a bit of a horror-themed episode last time, set in, of course, Jalisco, Mexico, around Puerto Vallarta, at Vishanti's insistence, of course. But yeah, so that's going to be tomorrow.
Insist.
That's going to be
very firmly.
Same time as this, 6 Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. That's on over on Top Hats Off. If you want to go see that, if you don't, I get it. Not everyone wants to come here and then later also watch me do an actual play of a obscure tabletop role-playing game. But on Thursday at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, Genetic Entropy But Worse with Pam Acker is going to be premiering. It really is somehow worse than the actual book Genetic Entropy, The Mystery of the Genome, which I have read, and it is atrociously bad. If I were John Sanford, I would be embarrassed. let's see.
Oh wow.
No, Kip, it's okay. So it might not be easy to notice how bad it is unless
So this
you
isn't-
know about.
This is his
genetics.
book. He wrote this book.
Yeah, John Sanford wrote Genetic Entropy, The Mystery of the Genome, which is what Pam is basing this part of her talk on. And like I said, it might not be obvious just how bad the book is unless you have some background knowledge of population genetics. But if you have any at all, like even a smidgen, you will take a look at this book and you'll just be like, what is happening? And like, I mean, this guy takes one of the most famous papers in the history of population genetics, something that you learn about in like your earliest classes in population genetics. And he just blatantly misrepresents the entire point of the entire thing. Right? It's really bad. And it's like anyone who knows anything about the field would spot that in an instant. But he didn't write it for those people. That's why he wrote it as a popular level book for other people who don't know anything about it. So yeah, that's Thursday. Then on Saturday, we are going to be having the follow-up. Like I said, that'll be at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. Hopefully Dr. Josh can join us again. Dr. Kip, you were also welcome, as is Vishanti. So yeah. And then Tuesday is currently the plan is for it to be Ken with Bent. Hopefully Bent will be back with us, feeling better. He's currently feeling better than he was just a few days ago. I know there are some questions about that whole situation. I am not going to be giving out any more details than I already have. If you do have questions and you feel like you're comfortable, you can try asking Ben. But if you feel like you're not comfortable asking, you probably shouldn't have been asking me either. So, yeah, I'm not going to be giving away any more information other than Ben is now out of the hospital and he is doing better than he was when he went in. So, there you go. With that, I think that is it. Thank you so much, everyone who has super chatted, everyone who has liked, everyone who has just been here. You are all amazing, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week. Stay safe out there. And it's no longer Pride Month, but in honor of Vocab Malone, happy Pride, everybody. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Ben Hovind, Phil Ravara, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, John Ackerman, Strawberry Vein, Dr. Tapioca Weasel, Elaround Teller, Horseflesh, Ian Chen, Kelvin Brostick Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabdy Babbity, Sphincter of Doom, and Ballus. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.